Thank you. I appreciate that kind introduction, Dr. Ofterheide. It reads the way I wrote it, and I really like that. Again, I'm Paul Hudson. Grew up in this area. My first times I came to Oglethorpe, I was about 12 years old. And the place I used to hang out was Goodman Hall. That was a dormitory in those days. And that parking lot in front of it, when I look at it, I think of the old tennis courts that were there, and that's where I learned to play tennis. And but always loved Oglethorpe University, and when it came time to choose a college, for me there was no other choice. And so I came to Oglethorpe. That was back during the Revolution in 1968, and Oglethorpe was a college full of hippies, and it was very much unlike the way it is today. But I really did love Oglethorpe University and have all my life. And I'm just so glad that you're here. Let's see. So we're going to look at a history of Oglethorpe University. It's a living memorial to James Edward Oglethorpe. And here's the finest representation of Oglethorpe is here on this campus. It's called the Oval Portrait of James Edward Oglethorpe. And Dr. Thornwell Jacobs will say more about him later, but he was the one who verified this portrait back in 1932 during Georgia's bicentennial. But this Oglethorpe University, as you know, when you come in the gates, it was founded, as the sign says, 1835. But it was really founded in a different location. In 1835, this would have been almost inhabited by Creek Indians, but it was total wilderness. But it was founded at near Milledgeville, Georgia. And Oglethorpe had, the founder of Georgia, if ever you've been to Savannah, he laid out the town of Savannah and is a real legend in our state. And so this university was named after James Edward Oglethorpe. He comes to Savannah in 1732, so about 100 years later, and then running a little behind, 1835, that's when Oglethorpe University was founded. But originally it was outside of Milledgeville, Georgia. That was the capital. It's always been near the capital of Georgia, and that was before the Civil War. And this is what was called Old Oglethorpe University. And again, outside of Milledgeville, Georgia. And you see the old architecture is antebellum. It was sort of Greek revival with Doric columns. It had a cupola. Of course, it was painted white. And but here was the original building for Old Oglethorpe University. Now, something that survives from this, if you just go outside, not very far, and turn left, there's a little grove there, and you see a cornerstone. There's an urn on top of it that was kind of decorative and just added later. But the cornerstone for this building is on this campus, just outside the door. SAE fraternity. SAE, there was a chapter of that at Old Oglethorpe University, and SAE Brothers back in the 80s brought this cornerstone back to the campus where we are now. But here's where Oglethorpe University thrived before the Civil War. It was a Presbyterian college for young men. That's how it started. And it was one of the great alumni of Old Oglethorpe University was the poet and critic and musician Sidney Lanier. Lake Lanier, you've heard of, but he's a real icon in Georgia poetry. But he loved Oglethorpe University. He was from Macon, so he didn't have to go far. And he was very well educated. He had to take an exam in Latin and Greek in order to get into Old Oglethorpe University. And he loved, the curriculum then was for Greek, Latin, and mathematics. Greek, Latin, and mathematics. And then later on you would take other subjects. But he loved Oglethorpe University. It was, and that's the way college should be, and I hope it's going to be that way for you. It was for me at Oglethorpe, a time of discovery, but he had a lot of favorite professors. Lanier, Lanier Drive, that's named in memory of him. And then, but his favorite professor was named Dr. James Woodrow. You recognize the name Woodrow. He was the first professor in Georgia to have the PhD, and he taught science. And he was, and even at the beginning of Oglethorpe's history, faculty were inspiring students. And but here at Old Oglethorpe University, he would go to these science lectures of James Woodrow. He would give these sunrise lectures on science that Sidney Lanier loved. His brother Clifford was at Oglethorpe. He was a brother of SAE fraternity, and but Sidney was in a literary club called the Thalians, and that's what he loved so much. They were kind of like that movie, the Dead Poets Society, but they would meet in secret, but they would read poetry and read their writings and so forth. But at Old Oglethorpe, he loved the classroom, but he loved the extracurricular activity with the Thalians, and then occasionally they would go to Milledgeville. But that campus where he studied, this no longer exists. This building, in fact, we went later to mark it, and the hand of time had changed it, and the area was now a trailer park. But nearby is a fire station with a nice little lawn, and we marked Old Oglethorpe University with a marker. The marker that we have outside on Peachtree Road, I'm proud to say I was involved in that. And this campus is on the National Register of Historic Places, and I helped make that nomination. But here was Old Oglethorpe University, and where Sidney Lanier studied. But when he was in college was the time of the Civil War. And that's when Georgia left the Union. They left in nearby Milledgeville where the debates were. And so Sidney Lanier went off to fight during the Civil War. And as those who study Oglethorpe say, it died at Gettysburg. Put all its money in Confederate bonds. That wasn't a very good investment as it turned out. And so Oglethorpe University, Oglethorpe University died at Gettysburg. During the war, this building was it was on the way to Sherman's march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah. It stopped here, and this was a military hospital. A yellow flag was flying over it, but then it became dilapidated, and it really never came back after that. So this is Middle Oglethorpe, and this would be around the 1870s, I'm sorry. And if you're familiar with Atlanta, this would be right on the location where Atlanta City Hall is, right around State House Square, and this is a Gothic building. And here's where Oglethorpe had a brief revival. And here was in a different setting, a mansion in a bustling little railroad town. But here there was a law school at Middle Oglethorpe, and the first evening classes in Georgia were at Middle Oglethorpe. graduated governors, future governors. Joseph Mackey Brown was one of them who graduated from Middle Oglethorpe. But the dislocations of the Reconstruction era meant that it would be closed again. We have a wonderful source on this, and it's in the Oglethorpe Library. It's a leather-bound volume of the minutes of the Georgia trustee, of the Oglethorpe trustees, and you get a sense of it. It's exciting for a historian to read it. It's handwritten, but you can read about them meeting at a Masonic hall in Milledgeville, Georgia, and they're discussing a university to be named after the founder of Georgia. And then but it goes through all this time that we've just discussed here. But Oglethorpe had died again, and seemed like it had ended. But the one who would be the one to resurrect it, and this is my hero, I did my dissertation on it, Dr. Thornwell Jacobs. This would be, I think, a name to know, Thornwell Jacobs. And he was born in Clinton, South Carolina. And he was born in an orphanage, but his father was the president of the orphanage. Now it's called a school for children. But here he lived, and he went. His father also founded Presbyterian College, if you've ever heard of that one. And but growing up in Clinton, his grandfather used to come to Clinton, Thornwell's grandfather, and he had been on the faculty of Old Oglethorpe University, and maybe you get a sense of Old Oglethorpe University, what it was, and he had taught science there. But he used to tell little Thornwell about this wonderful college where there were students like Sidney Lanier and faculty members like Woodrow. I think it's wonderful, by the way, that intersection of Woodrow Way and Lanier Drive, and two of these figures of Oglethorpe's history. But the grandfather told this story about this wonderful college, and so when Thornwell was growing up, and he would say, one time he said, "Granddaddy, when I grow up, I want to go to Oglethorpe University." And the old man said, "My son, you'll never go to Oglethorpe." And he told him that story that I told you about, this wonderful university that died at Gettysburg and tried to resurrect and then had died again. But so Thornwell Jacobs couldn't go to Oglethorpe like he wanted, but he went to his father's school, Presbyterian College, and then he went to Princeton Theological Seminary. And at Princeton in New Jersey, that's where he had this idea, if only he could bring back Oglethorpe University from the dead and would have fine collegiate buildings like Princeton University. And so he's got this kind of mission, Thornwell Jacobs does, again, to bring a university back from the dead. He has a theology degree, but he doesn't want to preach, and he wants to be an institution founder like his father. And he loves Atlanta, and he's got this tradition. He wants to bring back an old college, but to make it new again. And he knows where he wants to have it, and that's where we are now, on Peachtree Road. And he's dealing with real estate developers. And they have a beautiful name for this general area. They call it Brookhaven. Brooks and creeks. When you go to Turner Lynch, you see a creek. And I, growing up in Brookhaven, I used to play in creeks all over this area. There were deep creeks, and now they've been built over and so forth. But brooks for creeks, and then havens for like a place of refuge. But so we have Thornwell Jacobs, and he's dealing with real estate people, and also he's dealing with the Presbyterian Church, because if he wants to bring back Oglethorpe University, this will be a Presbyterian college for for young men. And so he goes to pulpits and First Presbyterian churches throughout the South, and he tells a version of this Oglethorpe story that I told you. But it was a very touching story and sort of connected the Old South with the New South. And so he raises money. He makes a deal with a real estate company called the Silver Lake Park Company that he can have 48 acres where we are now for $10. But he's got to build a university, and he's going to do that. And so this is the university that he envisioned. What we have is an incomplete campus, but you can maybe approximate. You see in the lower right-hand corner is Peachtree Road, and then you see the driveway between the buildings. And at one time, that truly was a driveway and the entrance to Oglethorpe University. And you can imagine how it went all the way out to the main road. And then there would be granite buildings and granite, indigenous to Georgia, granite from Elberton, Georgia. They call it the granite capital of the world. And with steel frames, and then roofs of Vermont slate, and then trim with Indiana limestone. But a great, combination. And then he has these great architects. One was named John Henry Morgan. And he specialized in academic architecture, the Georgia Tech main tower building, and First Presbyterian Church, and some others. And he has a partner, Dillon, Morgan and Dillon. And then they have an associate architect named Walter T. Downing. And he did interiors, the Great Hall, and what we call the fishbowl. And it has that glass, so you don't quite get the whole idea, but it was meant to be like a little church there. So he's got these great architects, and then he's got this plan that is to be rendered in collegiate Gothic or Gothic revival in the form of a Greek cross laid out this way. Wasn't realized. So what we see is an incomplete campus. You can see where we are now, and at least a version of it, and then you can see the end of the quadrangle. But and the stadium wasn't part of the original design. The symbol of Oglethorpe University, or the logo, 1913, this was incorporated. So he's busily at work in 1913. Okay, so he lays the cornerstone, and this would be, we call it Hearst Hall, but this was before there was a lead donor, and it was called Administration Building. And here he's laying the cornerstone. Jacobs is on the right, and then that's little Frank Inman. His grandfather was Samuel Inman, one of these really prominent Atlantans. So this was quite a production. It began at North Avenue Presbyterian Church, and they came out from Atlanta. And then there was this dedication of the cornerstone. That would, and you can see it. You walk right by it, but maybe you don't bother to look at it. But you can see it's January 21st, 1915. That was 100 years ago that this happened, and it took about a year to build this. It was a building in the wilderness, and originally this area was called Cross Keys. That was a militia district before the Civil War, but now it's getting an identity as Brookhaven, but also as Oglethorpe University, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta, and it would be have its own. A big deal would be to have a post office, and so by 1916, this is when the doors are opened for Oglethorpe University, and that to me is a really big deal. Fall 2016, that truly will be the 100 years on Peachtree. Oglethorpe was on the quarter system then, but it opened in the fall quarter. So we have the university opened, and here's the first building, administration building. And the way you get here is you take, most people live in town, including Jacobs. He lives in Ansley Park, near Piedmont Park. But you would drive out to Peachtree, or you would take the trolley. When we opened in 1916, the next year is 1917, and this is when the United States becomes involved in World War I. And that's going to have, here you're opening the college, and then there's U.S. entry in World War I. That's going to interrupt it and be kind of a setback. And but there was a camp, and if you're new to the Atlanta, there was a military camp at the current location of DeKalb Peachtree Airport, PDK. That's a great place to visit, by the way. There's a restaurant there, and you see the planes coming in. But it was a World War I military camp about this time, and Oglethorpe was like a little West Point, and helping train soldiers for the Great War. But here was Oglethorpe was changing. Originally, it was to be Presbyterian male, but the Presbyterian connection never worked out. For one thing, Jacobs was an ardent evolutionist, and also he was always involved in real estate. If you go down North Druid Hills Drive, not far from the MARTA station, you'll see Thornwell Drive and Oglethorpe Avenue. That could have been located, but he found a better location here. But and originally it was to be a college for young men, but in the Great War, that's when women were admitted, and it became coeducational. That's an old-fashioned name for women. We're called co-eds, and but it has this identity, and it was non-sectarian, no Presbyterian connection, but there was no parking lots, and so where people parked was mainly in the driveway, and so Oglethorpe is beginning to grow. You see and you see those Gothic lampposts. Those have been there since before World War I, but the driveway doesn't go all the way out to Peachtree anymore. Now, this was the second building, but this is just a freestanding Lupton Tower, just 1/3 of this entire building. But and Oglethorpe would be built in increments due to money issues. And so here was John T. Lupton funded this. He heard that Oglethorpe story at the First Presbyterian Church of Chattanooga, and he was very touched. And so he funded construction, and you see this freestanding tower. Now Jacob's office, the Great Hall, but where Dr. Ray's office was, that's where Dr. Thornwell Jacobs' office was. But after the second building, he would be on the second floor where Dr. Shaw's office is now. And then it had chimes, and but you see this, the way the building is now is, Lupton Hall, where we are. Maybe you remember your first experiences in Lupton Hall where you're totally confused. It's not you, it's the building. This is really 3 buildings in one. Jacobs called it his triple dream come true. And they were put together, and it has 3 separate cornerstones. You can see those dedicated to members of the Lupton family. There's 3 entrances. When you go in Lupton Hall, you determine where you're going, and then you decide which entrance you're going to use. And the windows don't match on any of these 3 sections, but that doesn't detract from it. But this beautiful building, and Jacobs, he's calling all these buildings the silent faculty. He had a way with words here, and I don't know if this works, and I imagine it does with a lot of y'all, where you just kind of fall in love with the buildings. I know I did, even when I was 12 years old. I didn't know anything about them, but I just knew that I loved them. And there you see the silent faculty, that they would inspire students to learn and to do their best, and maybe a vision of the best. but very solid buildings, not one basement, but two basements, and built for the ages, this silent faculty, these Gothic buildings of Oglethorpe University. That carillon, that was added when I was here in the 1970s. Originally there were just 4 bells, but now that carillon added to the top. Here's Hermance Stadium. It was donated by Harry Hermance. He was an executive for, you've probably never heard of the F.W. Woolworth, but it was called the Dime Store, but it was a very popular store, and he was an executive for the Woolworth Company. But he loved sports, and so he funded a stadium, and it was named in his honor. And you get the picture here that Oglethorpe was due to money issues, was to be built in increments or pieces. And here, this was the first part of Hermance Stadium. It's 1/8 of a stadium. Really, it was to have 8 sections in a bowl shape. And so it was very ambitious. But here was the first section, and it was dedicated. And here's where football and baseball were played. But the dedication was on October 26, 1929. 3 days later, the stock market crashed on October 29th, and Hermance was never able to fulfill his pledge. But if you go in there, and since I was a child and when I was a student and staff member, I've always just walked around the Oglethorpe campus. You have all these clues that are right in front of you, but you're not aware of them. But here, if you go inside, you'll see the various gates, Gate A and then B, but right across from Gate A is Gate Z. And there's a lot of letters, missing in between. But this was to be an oval-shaped or bowl-shaped stadium. So really it's kind of like a monument to the Great Depression. It's a unique thing. Even though it's 1/8 of a stadium, it really is beautiful. And it was designed by Morgan and Dillon to complement the Oglethorpe campus and in a sense to match it. But you could ride a train out, and there was a time, for generations across the street where the MARTA was a Southern Railroad depot, and you could ride the train from Atlanta and get out. But here's where the Stormy Petrels would play baseball and football. And the football team, and again they were called, the nickname was the Stormy Petrels. Maybe we'll say more about this later. But here, and this was, football was just sort of developing, and there weren't divisions or anything like this, but Oglethorpe played bigger colleges like Georgia Tech and University of Georgia, Alabama Crimson Tide, if you can believe this, but here, and they were like sports writers used to call them appetizer, the first game of the season when they have these mismatches, and so Oglethorpe would play Georgia Tech in the 1920s. And if you walk, or maybe with a friend, walk just around and just look at these things that are etched into the limestone trim. But you can see there is one block that shows Oglethorpe's football scores with Georgia Tech. Early 20s, in the first game, Oglethorpe got drubbed 55-0. And then if you watch the progression, it's getting closer and closer. And by 1925, Oglethorpe lost 13-7. Wait till next year, they're thinking, sometimes you have a sense you're going to win. So Oglethorpe in 1926 has to be at Grant Field. Tech's not going to come out here. So they have this great coach. He was from Syracuse University, and his name was Harry Robertson. And he had something called the military shift. And they looked great even when they were losing, but they had this discipline, and they would play in places like the Orange Bowl and Polo Grounds in New York City, but also at Grant Field. But here, the offense was kind of like an option, but it had a lot of double reverses and triple reverses and line bucks and spin plays and things like this, and so and didn't pass, kind of kept it on the ground. But it was a very tight game, Oglethorpe and Georgia Tech in 1926. And Tech got off to an early lead, scored a touchdown, missed the extra point. Maybe they thought they'd be scoring a lot that day. But Oglethorpe, and I'm mixing metaphors here, but they hunkered down and didn't let Tech score anymore. And we're getting near the end of the game. And this is when Coach Robertson does something. He gets an Oglethorpe scrub, that would be like third or fourth string, to get in a fist fight with Georgia Tech's All-American. His name was Mac Thorpe. And according to the rules of the game, both players were kicked out. And right after that, Oglethorpe runs, they called it the old bootleg play, and he puts the ball on his hip and he goes around the end and scores with a swan dive into the end zone. So now it's time for the extra point. And they used what's called a drop kick in those days. And he was the quarterback, his name. And they all had nicknames. His nickname was Nutty Campbell. I used to wonder, but his granddaughter told me because he was as tough as a nut. But anyway, does the drop kick, goes through the uprights, and Oglethorpe beats Georgia Tech 1926, 7-6 in the greatest upset in Southern football. But this was the Oglethorpe Stormy Petrels. They were feisty. They were always outnumbered, but they did, and they also beat the University of Georgia as well. But this was Oglethorpe football. There was also baseball and the coach of both for a while was Frank Anderson. He was also the registrar. But that field we have, it's Hermant Stadium, and then it's Anderson Field, named after the original athletic director. And here's the last of the historic buildings. It was called Lowry Hall. Now it's been enlarged and called the Philip Weltner Library. But and again, the idea at Oglethorpe was to be a living memorial to the founder of Georgia, James Edward Oglethorpe. But here, it's not a replica, but it's inspired by Corpus Christi College, Oxford, where James Edward Oglethorpe went. That's a good one for one's bucket list, to go to Oxford University and to see Corpus Christi College, Oxford. But you'd see what's called Gateway Tower, and it has the same kind of silhouette as this. And we don't notice, the lantern that much, but there's a lantern that's patterned after one of the lanterns at Corpus Christi College, Oxford. Now, Oglethorpe's continuing to develop under Thornwell Jacobs, and again, he was a promoter, and but there were all these honorary doctorates that he awarded to real notables, and one of them was Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt right before he became president. But in those days, the graduations were held in theaters, and this was at the Fox Theater. But this is where Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave one of his greatest speeches that the Roosevelt historians would say. I wrote an article on this, but with the Oglethorpe perspective, I was able to do something that I was really proud of. But Oglethorpe awarded various doctorates, and Jacobs even made up some of them. One he called, this is really kind of with real foresight, he called it the Doctor of Public Service. And it had a red, white, and blue hood. But the notables, Franklin Roosevelt, Amelia Earhart, one of these graduations celebrated what Jacobs called the Year of the Woman. but also William Randolph Hearst and all these really notable people came to Oglethorpe University to be recognized by Dr. Thornwell Jacobs with honorary doctorates. In fact, William Randolph Hearst, the great publisher, was so appreciative that he gave a lake to Oglethorpe University, Silver Lake. Have any of y'all been to Silver Lake? I don't think many have. In the first group there weren't. But this should be, I think, a rite of passage here, is to go to Silver Lake. It's not far from here. It's kind of tucked away. But Woodrow Way would take you in that direction. And then go down, I think it's Frontenac. But anyway, you can find your way because it's not very far from here. But at one time, Oglethorpe University had more acres than students. It had 600 acres, including a 48-acre lake and stretching all the way up to Peachtree Road. But just about all of the land in this general area were Lanier Drive and Hermance Drive, and was all part of Oglethorpe's property. And but if ever and this would be a great place for light hiking or different kind of interludes that you might want to have. But it's a wonderful place to go, and you have every right to be there because Oglethorpe has this relationship with Silver Lake. And if you can see the dam here, and you can see how when the dam was breached, Oglethorpe helped rebuild the dam. But it's a wonderful place to visit. There's the Brittany Swim Tennis Club, but if you just park, forget the signs, whatever they say, but no one will challenge you. But if they do, just say, I go to Oglethorpe University, because that's part of the covenants here. Silver Lake, spent many hours there, and then of course, the way I am, I wanted to write a history of Silver Lake, and did, and was really, really proud of that. Here's the crypt of civilization. Y'all know where that is, right? Does anyone know where the crypt of civilization is? Yeah, it's in Hearst. Thank you. I don't say basement, I say the lower level. But there's a stainless steel door there. But behind that stainless steel door is this sealed chamber. It kind of looks the way you would imagine a pyramid chamber to look like. That was kind of the inspiration for the crypt of civilization. The pyramids were tombs, but this was like an unintended time capsule. The pyramids were, but so Jacobs takes this idea, but it's a time capsule, and he sealed it in 1940. And does anyone know? This will put us in the bonus round. When is it to be opened? Okay, Dr. Osterheide, I think we need a little work here. I think if you go to Oglethorpe University, you need to know this. This is not to be opened, and I'm glad you're sitting down, but not until 8113. It sort of gets you out of your comfort zone here. And for Jeopardy, Dr. Bobby, and things like that, let's include 8113 in there somewhere. It should be as familiar as 1492 or 1776. But here, I just mentioned this because I've written on the crypt of civilization. Couldn't believe what happened. It was reviewed in the New York Times. This was about the time of the millennium, Y2K, and I was dubbed an expert on time capsules. I wasn't, but I wasn't going to back down from that. But still, the crypt of civilization has been very, very good to me. I have, Dr. Osterheide mentioned the History Channel. I was on it for that. And I've got these wonderful expense-paid trips to Japan, Thailand, Romania, Niagara Falls. and the places I hadn't been to before, but the crypt of civilization, and even just, but I think people at Oglethorpe are kind of casual about it, but just this past summer, the Wall Street Journal came out. They just want to check it out, make sure it's still there, and there it is, the crypt of civilization. Now, after Thornwell Jacobs, Philip Weltner became president of Oglethorpe, and this is when the core curriculum started. Oglethorpe was one of the first to have a core curriculum, and it's gone through different incarnations since Philip Weltner's time. This would be after World War II. But here it was Philip Weltner, and he came up with this great idea of what a liberal arts and sciences education should do. It would be to make a life and to make a living. One is the finer things here, and the other is, paying the bills. But we want you to do both of those things. But this was the goal of an Oglethorpe education, and we've updated it now as we've added, make a difference, and with some sort of, social awareness here. But this is the Oglethorpe core founder, Philip Weltner, for whom the library is named. His son was Charles Weltner. If you go outside the library, you'll see the Shining Light Award, Philip and Charles Weltner. I met him when I was 10 years old, and he was in the role of, like John F. Kennedy, a liberal Democrat who believed in civil rights at a time of real change. And he was an Oglethorpe alumnus, Charles Weltner, Philip Weltner's son. Here's the coat of arms, and the idea of James Edward Oglethorpe. The idea is to be a living memorial to James Edward Oglethorpe. The boar's head, we're familiar with that, but that was a symbol of the Oglethorpe family. They were warriors, but that was a symbol of how ferocious the Oglethorpe family was when they fought. And then you see the chevron, and then the standard, or the text down below, and those are the last two words of the alma mater, Nescit cadere, in Latin translation, he does not know how to give up, or maybe I should say she does not know how to give up. And so this, you see different versions of the Oglethorpe coat of arms, stylized versions in the Great Hall and other places. Here's the field house. Other colleges call it gymnasium, but for some reason we call it field house. And here's a version of the Stormy Petrel. The Stormy Petrel is the mascot for Oglethorpe University. But it's part of the James Edward Oglethorpe legend. When he came across the Atlantic, he would look out on the ocean and he would see this bird. It's the most populous bird in the world, but you don't see it because it's ocean going. It only comes to land to breed. But this would fly in the face of storms. And so he wrote about this, inspired him. Actually, it's called, in the classifications, the storm petrel. But given a southern twist and a little idiosyncratic, the Stormy Petrel. But it's one of these unique athletic names, and the New York Times put it on a list one time of one of the coolest nicknames for any college in America, and I just love that, Stormy Petrels. And here's the Conant Performing Arts Center. This is in the 1990s. At one time, there was a Shakespeare festival here, and it began in a tent on Anderson Field, and so it kind of evokes a tent, but you've probably been in the auditorium of the Conant Performing Arts Center. And here's the Turner Lynch new building. You know when that was built, 2013. I don't even want to tell you what was there before, but there was a really beat brick building that was like in a time warp from the 1970s. And so when I go in the Turner Lynch, I feel like one of the Beverly Hillbillies or something. It's such a beautiful building, and it certainly wasn't that way in times past, but it's still pretty new, and I hope you're enjoying the Turner Lynch. I want to end with Eli Arnold. If you have, he's the university archivist, and he helped me with these slides. But if anyone's interested in Oglethorpe history, come see Eli Arnold. He's a reference librarian and the archivist in the Philip Weltner Library. But we're coming to a close now. I hope this has been useful to you, because you see Oglethorpe, but maybe you can see it with some sort of different eyes. But that's all I have for today. Are there any questions on Oglethorpe? Yes, sir. The elephant, yeah, I always leave that out. One reason I leave it out is this was a sad time in Oglethorpe's history because there was a medical school, and it's where Robinson Hall is, but that's been renovated. But it was a one-story building, incomplete, and eventually they were going to add the 3 stories. And so that's where the medical school was, and it, of course, it didn't have much money to have one, and there was a real rivalry with Emory University. But there was, and it was in November 1940, or 1941, Barnum and Bailey Circus was in town. And really it was a pygmy elephant. You have the image of a big elephant, but the smaller elephants. But they died of, it was mysterious. But some students and faculty went down to the Inman train yard where it was, near Inman Park, and put it on a flatbed truck. And it was in November, and it was really cold. So they kept it outside and they dissected it, the medical students. And then they buried it, but it would be somewhere, it may be covered by the Weltner Library or maybe in that land outside it. But that's the Oglethorpe elephant that was buried during World War II. Thank you for asking on that. Any other questions? Y'all want to go? Is that it? Yeah. Dr. Bobby.
You mentioned the urn from Old Oglethorpe brought here by SAE.
Yeah.
Under legitimate or less than legitimate circumstances?
Oh, it was, for once, I'm just kidding here. It was legitimate. And who helped us out? Milledgeville has a community, the Daughters of the American Revolution, and they're very conscious. And so they used their good offices. A lot of there is memorabilia of old Oglethorpe University at Georgia College in Milledgeville. That's a good, you know that college, but in their archives there is memorabilia of old Oglethorpe. But yeah, SAE, that was completely above board. So, any SAE brothers here? Okay. Well, I'm Paul Hudson. Thank you all very much.